I have a little interlude in my day, so I thought I would read the interlude chapter of Podkin One Ear. An interlude is usually a short moment, but I think this is quite a long interlude. We shall see. Interlude. The bard stops talking and gazes in Chief Hubert's direction, smacking his lips and generally trying his best to look thirsty. Hubert takes the hint and flicks an ear at his dozing cupbearer, so hard it nearly knocks him backwards. The startled rabbit grabs a wooden flagon, filled to the brim with frothy honey mead, and dashes over to the storyteller. Amongst protesting cries from the little rabbit sitting round his feet, the bard drains the whole flagon in 3 long gulps and then wipes the froth from his beard with the back of his hand. "Don't stop! Don't stop!" the rabbits cry. "Tell us what happened next." The bard lets out a belch, frowns, then lets out another. "Give me a minute," he says. "My pipes don't work as well as they used to. Bless my turnips, that was good mead." "Were the gorm really real?" one little rabbit asks. "My brother said they were just made up to frighten baby bunnies at night." "They were, really real," replies the bard. "Excuse me?" He eyes a plate of fresh, steaming cornbread next to a huge bowl of turnip soup, a knob of creamy butter slowly melting in its centre. But his audience have no intention of letting him stop for much longer. "What do you think it was that changed them then? Did anyone ever find out? Was it the witch's curse or was it something else?" The fear in the little rabbit's eyes makes it all too clear. She is worrying that something might happen in Thornwood. "Could have been a curse," says the bard. "Could have been something much more horrible. As far as this part of the story goes..." Oh dear, I really shouldn't gulp my drink like that. "As far as this part of the story goes, nobody had any idea. That's all you need to know for now." The bard is about to carry on, but something in the little rabbit's eyes makes him stop, wide, white and terrified, with tears glistening in the corners. He likes to scare his audience a little, but this is a Bramblemas Eve. She should be going to bed with dreams of sugared carrots and carved wooden dollies, not lying awake, scared witless. He tugs his beard for a few times, then reaches into one of the pouches of his belt, bringing out an ancient, much-folded piece of leather. "Listen," he says. "I don't normally do this, but..." "What?" the rabbits all squeal. "What have you got there?" "This," said the bard, unfolding the stained leather. "This is something I found on my travels. Something I don't usually read out to children, especially not when I'm in the middle of a tale." "Oh, please read it, please." The little rabbits are desperate for something secret, something forbidden. It's an account, you see, a tale of its own, copied down word from word from this old rabbit I met, far to the east of here, in Husland. The bard holds up the leather to show rows and rows of tiny runes, burnt or inked into it. The rabbits all kneeled up to squint at it, even though most of them can't read it. "A tale of what? The gorm? How they were made?" "Rhubarb and radishes, but you are nosy ones." "Yes, how the gorm came to be, in the words of one that was there. Now, I'll read it to you, but only if you promise to remember where we got to in the story. Do we have a deal?" The rabbits all shout about how well they can remember and that the deal has definitely been made. Nodding and waving to them in shush, the bard spreads the leather out on his knees and begins to read. My name is Una. I am old now, a long tooth, as they say here in Hoosland. But once I was a young rabbit, born in a little warren on the northern coast of Edinburgh called Sandywell. A simple place full of simple grey-furred fisher rabbits. That warren has another name now, and the rabbits don't fish anymore. Now they are called the Gorm. They do things that set your fur shivering and your eyes shaking. But it wasn't always that way. That's why I want my story written down so that others can learn from it. So the same thing doesn't happen to any other warren like it did to ours. When I was a little doe, we had a happy, carefree life. We lived right on the edge of the sandiest beach you ever saw, and we used to spend hours running around the dunes and splashing in the rock pools. When I think back, all I remember is the sun in my eyes, sand between my toes, and salt spray on my fur. Happy days. Our chief was a funny little rabbit named Kramer. Kramer the Cautious, he was known as, for he never made a decision without going over it 100 times or more. He was known for changing his mind, getting muddled, and generally putting everything in a pickle. I remember hearing my father and his friends moaning about him many an evening in the Longbarrow, but nobody dared to do anything about it. He had the magic helmet of the goddess, you see, a great metal thing with copper horns. On him it looked like an upside-down cauldron, but it protected him from any spear or blade, and he never took it off. It did have a special name, but we just called it the copper pot. Sandywell wasn't the most exciting warren to live in, but it was safe and warm, and we were happy. At least until that terrible day. I don't like to speak of it, but I know I must. Kramer, our chief, had finally decided that we need to dig a new long burrow. The sandy soil of the warren tended to crumble, and the older parts were wearing away. It was a big job, and all the rabbits had to help, even us young kittens. We carried baskets of soil out for the diggers and brought them drinks and food. The soil was soft and loamy, and the new burrow fast appeared. Then, after a few days of digging, a cry went out that something had been found. I remember dashing down there with my friends, expecting to find pots of gold or fairy treasure. Instead, there was something else. It makes my fur crawl to think of it, even now, after all this time. The thing, it was there, jutting up out of the ground like a great rotten fang. It was dark metal, iron of some sort perhaps. We had seen lumps of iron before. We knew it was metal the goddess hated, and that no rabbit could work it. But there had been tiny lumps, the size of your paw or so. This thing was huge. The size and as tall as the biggest rabbit in the warren, and then some. There was something about it. It didn't feel right. You could sense it pulsing and grinding inside itself, as if it was angry and full of something nasty. It was jagged and rough, but under the surface you could see things that seemed to twitch and move, spikes and horns here and there, a tentacle, even an eye or a mouth. We all knew it was evil. That was very clear. Nobody wanted to go near the new Longbarrow after that. Our priestess sealed off the tunnel with magic charms, and we all tried to pretend it hadn't happened. But none of us slept easy after that night. And then the noises started. Deep in the dead of night you could hear them. Voices mostly. Some belonging to rabbits, some belonging to something else. Sometimes they were laughing and chanting too, although not in any language we had heard before. And then the hammering started. From that day, Cranmer, our chieftain, was almost never seen in daylight. Every night when the warren was asleep, he went down there with his soldiers to be near that thing. It changed them, told them how to make the iron and hammer it and shape it, whispered dark secrets and forbidden promises in their ears. That evil shard of metal took our sheaf, it did. What could it have offered him? Power, strength, riches. Maybe it took away all his caution and gave him something else instead. I know this for sure, though. All the time he was forging it into something else. It was forging him as well. The bard stopped a moment, but he could see the little rabbits enraptured, the older rabbits too. The entire Longborough was now hanging on his every word. He cleared his throat and continued. A week or so later, the night hammering stopped. The next day, Cranmer showed himself. It was a mere day feast, as I remember, the day we honoured our goddess of the sea. We were all sat in the Longborough about to start dinner of grilled mackerel and crab cakes, the last fish I ever ate. Cranmer walked into the Longborough with his soldiers, and every rabbit almost screamed. The oversized copper pot wasn't on his head anymore. In its place was a different helmet, an iron one, all twisted and spiked. It had 2 horns, like a mockery of the goddess's helm, but they were mismatched and jagged things. He walked taller and broader than before. This was not Cranmer the Cautious anymore. This was a part of an evil iron thing, walking around in rabbit form. He spoke to us then in a grating, scraping voice that none of us recognised. In the years since, I've tried to remember what he said, but the truth is I wasn't really listening. All I could do at that time was stare at that iron war helm of his, but mostly at his eyes, at his and all his soldiers. They weren't rabbit eyes anymore, you see. They were red like rusted iron or dried blood. Some rabbits stood up and protested. Our priestess was one, my uncle another. The soldiers grabbed them and took them away deep into the warren. We never saw them again. That night, my family and I, and a lot of others beside, all crept out of Sandywell and ran. We ran for our lives, and we didn't stop until we had forests, rivers and mountains in between that place and us. If you're listening to this and you want to stay safe and free, you'll do the same. And wherever you'll end up, take this one piece of advice from an old rabbit who has kept her skin long enough to know. Keep your warren safe. Keep your warren warm. But don't dig too deep. The bard folds up the old leather parchment and tucks it back inside his belt pouch. There is silence for a little while afterwards as the little rabbits imagine horrid things buried in the earth beneath their bottoms. But buried is perhaps better than a wandering witch putting curses on you and turning you into a monster. The bard looks at the little girl rabbit and sees she is slightly less terrified, which will have to do. The silence doesn't last for long, of course. Was the copper pot a magic weapon, like the star claw? Did the chieftain turn into Scarishmank? A little speckled rabbit looks up at the bard with her huge saucer eyes glinting in the firelight. His friends all nod, wanting to find out too. Even more questions? You are an inquisitive one indeed, aren't you? The bard reaches down and tweaks one of her floppy ears. Way back, before memories even began, the goddess herself gave each of the 12 rabbit tribes a magic treasure. Sandywell had the copper pot, and Starclaw was the prize of Mumbury Warren, who were once the greatest tribe of all. Did we get a gift? Where's our magic weapon? The bard laughs at this and winks over at Chief Hubert, who is rolling his eyes as he sips at the bowl of buttery turnip soup. Thornwood, Warren, is too new for that. It hasn't been here much more than 60 years. In fact, at the time of my story, it was little more than a scrap in the ground, which is why the Gorm never bothered with it. Where are the magic gifts now? Who's got the dagger? Did the Gorm destroy the helmet? What other magic things were there? Yes, yes, called the other. Where is the dagger now? What happened to it? What happened? Bang! The bard brings the wooden flagon down on the tabletop, making all the little rabbits jump. They squeak and shiver for a bit until he fixes them with his best glare. Then they are completely silent. When all can be heard is the crackle of the fire and the slurping of Chief Hubert's soup, he speaks again. I do believe we had a deal, didn't we? They were running from the Gorm, one rabbit calls out. Podkin had just toppled a tree onto the riders, yells another. They were squished like raspberry jam. There was blood everywhere and eyeballs and things. All right, says the bard. That's quite enough of the gory detail. Now, let me carry on where I left off.